What would you do if the most powerful and dangerous woman in the city showed up at your workplace, put your entire career on the line, and told you to save someone's life or else? What if saving that life came with a condition so outrageous, so personal, so completely out of line that it should have made you walk away immediately? And what if, despite every warning sign, despite every rational reason to leave, you stayed? Not because you were forced, not because of the money, but because something in you recognized that this story was bigger than the trap it arrived in. Stay with me, because what happened next will make you question everything you think you know about love, power, manipulation, and the kind of courage that doesn't announce itself. This is my story, and I promise you, you have never heard anything like it. Before we go any further, drop your location in the comments right now. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. I want to know. And if you are new here, hit that subscribe button because you do not want to miss a single part of what I am about to tell you. Now let's go. There are moments in life that split everything into before and after. The night Madame Cha-Rin pressed a gun to my future and called it an opportunity, that was mine. The zip ties were tight around my wrists, but I had stopped focusing on that 20 minutes ago. I focused instead on the rain hitting the blacked-out windows of the SUV, on the two armed men sitting across from me saying nothing, and on the fact that I had agreed to get into this car. That part was important. Nobody dragged Dr. Amara Mensah anywhere. I had chosen this. Because 62 minutes before I climbed into that vehicle, a small, elegant Korean woman had appeared in the parking garage of Yonsei University Hospital, looked at me with the precision of someone who had studied me for a long time, and said 8 words. Save my grandson. I will make it worth it. Her name was Madame Cha-Rin. I did not know that yet. What I knew was that she had a photograph of a 5-year-old boy on her phone, that the boy's name was Min-soo, and that he had a catastrophic cerebral hemorrhage that every senior neurosurgeon in Seoul had already declined to operate on. She had found me because my name kept appearing in research papers on exactly this type of case. I was 32 years old. I was a black woman from Accra doing a research fellowship in a city that had not entirely decided what to do with me. And I had one answer when a child was dying. The car stopped. The building had no sign. The entrance had 4 armed men. Inside, the hallways were white and silent and lined with fresh flowers that nobody was awake to appreciate. I was led to an operating theater that was cleaner than any private facility I had ever seen. And there he was, Min-soo, 5 years old, small as a held breath, connected to monitors that were screaming slow warnings into the cold air. I turned to the woman who had brought me here. She was watching me through the glass with her hands folded and her face composed, the way a person looks when they have already decided the outcome and is simply waiting for reality to agree. I scrubbed in. I did not negotiate. I did not ask what she had meant by worth it. There would be time for that. But behind the glass, I noticed a man. Tall. Still. Watching me with dark eyes that held something that was not quite hope and not quite coldness. He was watching me the way people watch something they're afraid to need. The surgery took 7 hours and 40 minutes. I would not remember all of it cleanly afterward. The brain protects itself from extremes by softening the edges of memory. But I remembered the specific moments when everything nearly ended. At the 2-hour mark, Min-soo's blood pressure dropped so fast the monitor alarm sounded like a scream. I did not look up. I adjusted, compensated, kept moving. At hour 4, the bleeding from a compromised vessel sent a wave of tension through the whole room that I felt in my back teeth. He is not losing more blood than I can manage, I told myself, and I said it out loud too, because sometimes the room needs to hear it. At hour 6, he stabilized. At 7 hours and 40 minutes, I closed. I stepped back from the table and let my hands shake for exactly 30 seconds. I had learned to allow 30 seconds. Then I stripped my gloves and walked out. Cha-Rin was sitting in the corridor in a pale gray suit, perfectly straight, prayer beads between her fingers. The man from the window was standing behind her, arms crossed, jaw set, eyes on me before I had fully cleared the door. "He is stable," I said. "He will need 6 weeks of monitored recovery. I will need daily access to his charts and full oversight." Cha-Rin stood slowly. She looked at me the way people look at something they've waited a long time to see. Then she did something that silenced every guard in that hallway. She bowed. Not a performance. Not diplomacy. Something that came from a lower and more genuine place. I did not bow back. I was too tired, and I had been raised to accept gratitude without shrinking from it. "He is my patient now," I said. "And I protect my patients." She nodded once. I expected nothing less. I turned to leave. Then Cha-Rin said, quietly, "We have prepared a room for you. You will stay." I turned back around. It was not a question. The man from the window was watching me again. Still unreadable. Still with that expression I could not quite name. I filed it away and went to find the room. The suite was ridiculous. Floor-to-ceiling windows, fresh orchids, a bed that probably cost more than 3 months of my fellowship stipend. I sat on the edge of it and thought about all the things that felt wrong about this situation. The list was long. Then I noticed the folder on the nightstand. Inside was a contract. 28 pages. The first 26 were straightforward. 30 days of medical supervision for Min-Soo, compensation that would clear every debt I had accumulated since medical school and fund my research for 3 years afterward. I read every line. It was generous in a way that felt deliberate. Then I reached page 27. A handwritten addendum in Korean. I photographed it and ran it through a translation app, reading the result 3 times to make sure I had understood correctly. In addition to the above, Dr. Mensah will be formally presented as a prospective match for Yun Jiho, heir to the Yun organization, with the intention of a permanent union to be arranged at the conclusion of the agreed period. I sat with that sentence for 4 minutes. Then I picked up the folder and went to find Madame Cha-Rin. She was in a sitting room 2 floors up, arranging orchids with the focused calm of someone who had nothing to explain. I placed the contract on the table beside her. She looked at it and then at me. "I will care for Min-Soo," I said, "because he is my patient and I do not abandon patients. But I am not a reward. I am not a match. And I am not available for arrangement." "Of course not," she said, without missing a beat. "Then why is it written there?" "Because you are precisely the kind of woman who would refuse it," she said. "And that is precisely why I wrote it." I stared at her. She picked up the orchid she had been arranging and tilted her head slightly, as if the flower required more attention than I did. And then the door opened. He walked in, the man from the window, and stopped when he saw the contract on the table. His eyes moved from it to his mother to me, and something tightened in his face that was not quite anger and not quite surprise. It was the expression of a man who had seen this before. "Mother," he said, very quietly. "What did you do?" His name was Jiho. Yun Jiho. He was 36, and he had the particular stillness of someone who had learned young that showing nothing was safer than showing the wrong thing. He did not raise his voice at his mother. He did not perform his anger. He went cold and precise the way a temperature drops before a storm, and somehow that was more unsettling than shouting would have been. I learned these things quickly because I was very good at reading people. Neurosurgery teaches you that. The brain is just the body's most honest room. He was the heir to the Yun organization, which was the polite word for what it was. Built by his father over 30 years. His father died when Jiho was 12, and Cha-Rin had held the entire structure together through will and intelligence, and a complete refusal to let anything fall. Jiho had inherited it at 28, and the organization under his leadership had expanded in ways his father had never managed. He was feared in the precise and practical way of someone whose competence had never been questioned. He had a son but no wife. Minsu's mother, a woman named So-yeon, had died 18 months ago. The official record said accident. Jiho had not discussed So-yeon with anyone since the funeral. I found out most of this from Yoonji, a young housekeeper who communicated through long silences and very carefully selected sentences, and occasionally, when she had decided I could be trusted, through complete paragraphs. I also found it out from watching Jiho move through his own house. He checked every exit in every room he entered. He never sat with his back to a door. He kept a precise physical distance from everyone around him, close enough to respond, far enough to be unreachable. Except with Minsu. With Minsu, all of that dissolved. I watched him once through the observation window of the recovery suite, not knowing I was there. He was sitting beside the bed with his son's small hand held in both of his, and his whole face was different, open and undefended and completely present in a way that it was at no other time. That was the most important piece of information I collected in those first 4 days. He was not unreachable. He was just very, very careful about who he let reach him. Later, I heard him in the hallway saying to his mother, "You cannot purchase a person." Her reply, "I didn't purchase her. I recognized her." And then one word from him that stopped me completely, again. Again meant there had been someone before me. Someone brought into this household under similar circumstances who had not stayed or had not survived the sting. I needed to know which one. That word lived in my head for 2 days. I asked carefully. Most of the staff deflected with the practiced smoothness of people who had been trained to say nothing. Then, on the 3rd night, I found a photograph slipped under my door. A woman, mixed Korean and Southeast Asian, early 30s, professional posture, standing beside Jiho at a formal dinner, both of them arranged in the particular way of people who are being observed and know it. On the back, Park Ha-eun. 14 months ago. I searched her name discreetly. Ha-eun was a corporate lawyer. She had left the Yun household after 8 months. No public statement. But I found a short interview she had given to a small legal journal, and in the middle of a paragraph about professional resilience, one sentence that I read 4 times, "There are places that welcome your ability and treat your personhood as negotiable." Learning the difference cost me a year. I put the photograph down. I understood the warning it contained. That evening I went to check on Minsu. He was awake, sitting up against his pillows with the focused seriousness of a 5-year-old conducting important business. He looked at me for a long moment with his father's exact eyes. "Are you the doctor who fixed my head?" he asked. "I am." He considered this. "Papa was crying when you came out of the room," he said, as if reporting a factual observation. I heard him. He thought I was sleeping. I sat down beside his bed. "He was scared," I said. "That means he loves you very much." "I know," said Minsu. And he said it with absolute certainty, the way children state things they have never doubted. It went somewhere in my chest and stayed there. Minsu and I settled into a morning routine. I checked his vitals, reviewed the overnight monitor data, asked him questions about what he had dreamed, and listened to his answers with complete seriousness, because he gave them with complete seriousness. He showed me, on the 4th morning, a drawing he had made. 2 figures, one tall and brown, one small, standing beside a tree that appeared to be on fire or possibly blooming. It was hard to tell. "That's you and me," he said. I taped it to the wall of my suite that night, which surprised me. I was not usually a person who taped things to walls. I traveled. I moved between cities and hospitals and research programs. I did not accumulate things that needed to be put somewhere permanent. I sat looking at that drawing for a long time. While I was sitting there, my phone rang. My research supervisor at Yonsei. I answered, expecting a check-in. What I received instead was a carefully worded explanation that my fellowship had been placed on administrative suspension pending a review of a conflict of interest complaint related to my private medical engagement outside the hospital. I sat very still. Private medical engagement. The words were a cage built from the truth. Someone had reported me to the university. Someone inside this building had taken what I was doing here, caring for a child, and reframed it as professional misconduct. I went back through the past 6 days in my mind, organized the information, and arrived at the only conclusion that fit all the facts. I went to find Cha-Rin. She was in the garden. She looked at me the way she always looked at me, calibrated, patient, already prepared for what I was going to say. "You reported me," I said. She did not deny it. She explained it instead, in the way that was somehow worse than denial. She explained that my fellowship had already been under threat from a colleague named Dr. Lim who had been quietly sabotaging my work since I arrived. She told me she had simply moved faster than Dr. Lim would have moved, because she needed me here and Dr. Lim's version would have been messier. "You took my career from me to keep me in your building," I said. "I removed an obstacle," she said, "that was never going to let you succeed anyway." I had no words for how furious I was. The fury was enormous and clean and entirely useless, because she was right about Dr. Lim, and we both knew it. I did not speak to Cha-Rin for 3 days after that. I cared for Minsu. I reviewed his charts. I monitored his recovery with the focused precision of someone who was going to do their job regardless of the circumstances around it. But I ate in my suite and I worked and I thought. On the 3rd evening, Jiho found me in the garden. He sat down on the bench across from me without asking, which was not something I would have accepted from most people. From him, I let it pass, because I had the sense that uninvited sitting was for him a significant gesture. He did not offer comfort. I would have rejected it. He said instead, she did it to So-yeon too. Maneuvered her into a position where staying felt easier than leaving. I saw it happening. I did not stop it. I looked at him. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because you deserve to know you are not the first person she has done this to," he said. "And because I am tired of pretending the things that are true are not true." That was the first real sentence he had ever said to me. The others had been functional, medical updates, logistical arrangements, the careful formal language of 2 people being managed by someone else's plan. This was different. "What happened to So-yeon?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. The garden was very still around us. Then he said, "That is a longer answer than I can give you tonight. But I need to tell you something about her. Something my mother does not know I know." He looked at the ground, then back at me. His face in the low evening light was the face of someone who had been carrying a specific weight for a very long time and had just decided to put part of it down. So-yeon had not died in an accident. She had died of a brain aneurysm, but the aneurysm had been diagnosed 8 months before her death. She had known. She had been treating it quietly with a specialist outside the Yun network, hiding the diagnosis because she had learned, in 3 years inside this household, that Cha-Rin did not accommodate weakness. She had never told Jiho. He had discovered it 6 weeks after the funeral, when he quietly obtained her private medical files. He had spent 18 months knowing that his wife died hiding an illness from him. Knowing that the environment his mother had built had made honesty feel more dangerous than a hemorrhage. I listened to all of this in the garden without interrupting. When he finished, the silence had weight. "Her aneurysm was treatable," I said. With early intervention, her survival rate would have been over 80%. He received that information the way he received everything, without visible collapse, with the contained stillness of someone who had long ago made peace with not showing pain in front of witnesses. "Did you know," he asked, very quietly, "about who I was when you operated on Minsu? What world you were walking into?" "I knew it was complicated," I said. "I knew the building had armed guards and no name on the door. I didn't know the specific details. But Minsu was dying, and those details weren't the deciding factor." He nodded slowly. "Would you have come anyway?" he asked. I thought about it properly, the way he deserved. "Yes," I said. "I would have come anyway." Another silence. Softer this time. "So Yun was afraid of my mother," he said. "From the beginning. I told myself it was adjustment. I told myself she would settle in. I was wrong about what I was looking at." "What were you looking at?" He turned to me. A woman who had decided staying was safer than telling the truth. And I missed it because I wanted to miss it. I looked at him for a long moment. "That is the most honest thing you have said to me." "I know," he said. "I am trying to be a different kind of person than I have been." I was reviewing Minsu's charts on a Thursday morning when my phone lit up with a notification from a Korean news aggregator I had downloaded to practice reading headlines. I opened it. The photograph was of me, taken in the garden 3 days earlier, me walking beside Minsu, his small hand in mine, both of us looking at a flower he had found interesting. It was a good photograph. Clear, warm, natural-looking. I had not known it was being taken. The headline translated to Yun Heir's new chapter, The Foreign Doctor Who Saved His Son. The article did not say we were engaged. It did not have to. The implication was in every word, every carefully selected detail, every mention of my credentials alongside descriptions of the Yun household. It was architecture, not journalism. Someone had built a public version of a story that had not yet happened. My phone rang within minutes. My mother in Accra, confused and alarmed. 3 colleagues from Johns Hopkins, ranging from warmly curious to carefully skeptical. My research supervisor at Yonsei, who had just reinstated my fellowship and was now, I could hear in his voice, reconsidering that decision. And then a message from Dr. Lim, the colleague who had spent 8 months undermining my work, who had filed the complaint that suspended my fellowship. 3 words, "Now we understand." I put my phone face down on the table. I sat with my hands flat and my breathing even. I let the anger move through me the way my mentor had taught me, like water through a net. Feel it. Don't fight it. Keep thinking. Then I stood up, walked to Cha-Rin's study, and opened the door without knocking. "I want 2 things," I said. My fellowship fully protected in writing, and a public correction of that article. If I do not have both by Friday, I will walk out of this building and explain to every journalist in Seoul exactly why Minsu's neurosurgeon chose to leave. Cha-Rin looked at me over her reading glasses. She did not look surprised. She looked, if anything, slightly satisfied, as if my reaction was confirmation of something she had expected. "Friday," she said. "Friday," I confirmed. By Wednesday, my fellowship was reinstated in writing, a formal letter from the university president, with specific language protecting my research position for the remainder of my term. Cha-Rin had managed it in under 48 hours, which told me more about the depth of her influence at Yonsei than any conversation could have. The public correction did not come. A second article ran instead. Longer than the first. More detailed. With quotes from family sources describing me as a natural presence in the household and deeply connected to young Minsu. The article included background on my research, my credentials, my training at Johns Hopkins. It made me sound impressive, and it made the implication undeniable. By Friday morning, it had been shared 40,000 times. I understood then what Cha-Rin had done. She had not simply published a rumor. She had built a structure of public narrative so solid that walking away from it would now cost me more than staying. Leaving meant the story would define me. Staying at least gave me agency over what the story became. It was, I had to admit through clenched teeth, brilliant. Ji-ho confronted his mother that afternoon with an anger I had not yet seen from him, quiet, cold, and absolute. I heard it from the hallway without intending to. He said, "You are doing to her exactly what you did to So-yeon." And Cha-Rin said something I did not expect. Her voice changed. Something left it, the composure, the architecture, the control. What remained was smaller and more human. She said, "I am dying, Ji-ho. I have 8 months. I needed to know you would not be alone." I stopped walking. I stood in the hallway with my hand against the wall and the silence of a house that had just shifted around a new truth. Ji-ho did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was completely different. "How long have you known?" "For months." "And you told no one?" The silence that followed had a different quality than all the other silences in this house. This one was grief. Cha-Rin had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She had known since October. She had told nobody, not her doctors inside the organization, not her son, not a single person in the household she had run for 40 years. Because Cha-Rin did not show the seams. She never had. To show the seams was to invite the question of whether the structure could hold, and she had spent her entire adult life ensuring that question was never asked. That evening, I went to her sitting room. Not because I had forgiven her. I had not. Not because I owed her anything. I was still furious about the article, about my fellowship, about the photograph taken without my knowledge, about the 8 months she had let So-yeon carry a fatal diagnosis alone. My list of grievances was long and every item on it was legitimate. But she was a patient now. And I did not abandon patience. She was already in bed when I arrived, something I had never seen. She looked smaller than she did in her chair. More human. We talked for 2 hours. She told me about Ji-ho's father, who was killed when Ji-ho was 12. About the night she received the news and understood that every structure protecting her family now depended entirely on her. About what it had required, not just the strength, but the specific kind of loneliness that comes from deciding, once, to never let anyone carry anything with you because the cost of them dropping it was too high. "I have spent my life making sure nothing could break us," she said. "And now I am looking for someone to hold it when I cannot." "That does not give you the right to choose for other people," I said. "No," she said. "It gives me the desperation." We sat with that. Outside, the city moved in its usual indifferent way. Then she looked at me with the expression of someone who had decided to open a door they had kept closed for a long time. "There is something else," she said. "About Min-soo. Something that will change everything you think you understand about this family. And I need to tell you before I lose the courage to." The hemorrhage had not been random. Min-soo had a rare inherited vascular condition, a malformation in the blood vessels of the brain that ran through the Yun bloodline like a fault line. Cha-Rin carried it. Her husband had carried it. And So-yeon's aneurysm, the one she had hidden, the one that killed her, had not been coincidental. It was the same condition, passed down through years of tightly closed social circles and undisclosed medical histories. Cha-Rin had commissioned a private genetic analysis 3 years ago. She had confirmed the pattern. She had said nothing to So-yeon because she did not trust So-yeon with it. She had said nothing to Ji-ho because she did not know how. She had carried it alone, the way she carried everything, until the night Min-soo collapsed and the weight of the secret became heavier than her ability to hold it. She had chosen me specifically not only for my training, not only for my reputation, because my research fellowship at Yonsei was focused on exactly this category of inherited vascular malformation. I was, without knowing it, the world's most relevant emerging specialist for exactly the condition that was quietly moving through this family. I sat across from her bed and let the full shape of it settle into my understanding. The pieces rearranged themselves, why my name had surfaced through a chain of contacts across 3 continents, why the compensation was so specifically generous, why the addendum about Jiho had been written at all. It was not romance. It was not sentimentality. It was the most practical decision she had ever made, dressed in the language of matchmaking because she did not know another way to anchor someone permanently to a cause. Does Jiho carry the gene? I asked. Yes, she said. Does he know? She closed her eyes briefly. No. I stood up. Then I am going to tell him, I said. Tonight. Because I am a doctor and this is his life, and he does not get to not know something that affects his survival and his son's. She did not argue. She simply nodded, slowly, with the expression of a woman who had spent months preparing for this moment and was relieved, in the deepest and most exhausted part of herself, that someone else was finally going to carry it. I told Jiho in his study, sitting across from him with the genetic report open on the table between us. I explained the condition clearly and completely, the way I would explain it to any patient's family member, not simplified, not softened, not managed. He was an intelligent man, and he deserved accurate information. I gave it to him in full. He received it the way he received everything difficult, without collapse, without visible fracture, with the contained and devastating stillness of someone who had been trained since childhood to hold weight without showing it. He read through the report twice. He asked 3 precise questions. I answered all 3. Then he sat back. My mother has known this for 3 years, he said. Yes. So-yeon was carrying this condition. He wasn't asking. He was placing the piece into a shape he was already reconstructing. My mother knew. And she said nothing. Yes. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. I waited in it. I did not fill it with reassurance or redirect it toward what could be done. He needed to sit in the full size of what had happened, and it would have been a disservice to shrink it. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual. So-yeon hid her diagnosis because she was afraid of my mother's reaction to weakness. And my mother knew the underlying cause and said nothing because she did not trust So-yeon. He exhaled slowly. They were both protecting themselves from each other. And neither of them told me. Yes, I said, for the 3rd time. He looked at me. Something shifted in his face, not the breaking of composure, but the releasing of a tension he had been holding for a year and a half without realizing how much of his energy it was consuming. For 18 months, he said quietly, I thought I was grieving a marriage that was good, but not good enough. Now I find out I was grieving something I never fully had access to. That is a different kind of loss, I said. Yes. He looked at the report. Then, with the particular unexpectedness of something genuine, the corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile, exactly, but the shadow of one. My mother made you a solution and a complication at the same time, he said. That is the most Cha-Rin thing I have ever heard. And then, briefly, completely, he smiled. It changed his face. I stored that information in the category of things I was not going to examine too closely, and then spent the following week examining it constantly. The next few days had a different quality to them. Jiho began joining Minsu's morning checkups. Not every day, but enough that it became expected, and then normal, and then the absence of it on a Thursday felt like something was missing from the room. He asked intelligent questions, biochemistry-level questions that surprised me until he mentioned, briefly, that he had studied it for 2 years before his father's death made that path impossible. I stored that too. Min-soo began demanding that we both be present for his stories at night. He was strategic about it in the way that 5-year-olds are strategic, entirely transparent, and completely effective. He would start a story and then say, midway through, "Wait, I need Alma and Appa to both hear this part," and we would look at each other over his head with the helpless expression of adults outmaneuvered by someone 1/3 their height. The household relaxed around us. The guards were less tense. Yoonji smiled more in the hallways. The formal distance that had structured every interaction in the first 2 weeks began to soften at its edges. Then a message arrived for Jiho at dinner. He read it once, put his phone face down on the table, and for the rest of the meal he was present in body and completely elsewhere in attention. Later I found out why. The message had contained a photograph of me, taken outside the building on the street, without my knowledge. And a note, "Remove the foreign woman or we remove her for you." He moved my suite that night without telling me why. I noticed immediately. New room, new floor, different corridor, double the guards outside the door. I was not difficult about logistics, but I was very direct about being managed. I found Jiho in his office the next morning and closed the door. "Tell me why," I said. He told me there was a threat. He kept it vague: rival organization, external pressure, a message he had received. He used words like precautionary and temporary, and I could hear, underneath each of them, the decision to give me a reduced version of the truth. "You are managing me," I said. He looked at me. "You have decided what I can handle, and you are giving me the portion you think I should have. That is the same method your mother uses. On everyone. Including So-yeon." Something in that landed differently than I expected. He went very still. "I am trying to protect you," he said. "I know," I said. "And I am telling you that I do not need your protection. I need your honesty. Those are 2 different things, and only one of them I am asking for." He looked at me for a long time. I did not look away. The silence had the specific quality of a moment that was deciding something. Then the lights went out. Every light in the building, all at once, plunging the entire floor into complete darkness. For a half second, nothing happened. Then I heard Jiho move, fast, purposeful, already going somewhere specific. I was already moving too. Not toward the door. Toward the stairs. Toward Min-soo. I had memorized the layout of this building in the first week. It was a habit. Whenever I worked in an unfamiliar facility, I mapped it. Exits, stairwells, the location of every piece of equipment I might need in an emergency. My mentor had called it the surgeon's paranoia. I called it being prepared. I reached Min-soo's recovery suite in the dark in under 90 seconds. His door was open. Inside, 3 of his monitors had gone dark when the power cut. His backup equipment had not yet activated. He was awake, sitting up, silent in the way frightened children go silent when they understand that making noise might make things worse. "I'm here," I said. I moved his bedside by touch and memory. "I'm right here." I located the manual backup monitor I had insisted be installed as a condition of my stay. It had its own battery. I activated it. Within 30 seconds, I had his vitals. Within 2 minutes, I had confirmed he was stable, his heart rate elevated, but within normal range, the fear more than the physiology. "Is it bad?" he asked. "No," I said. "It's just the lights. You are perfectly okay." He held my hand in both of his small ones and did not let go. The lights came back 12 minutes later. By then, Jiho's security team had located and restrained the 3 men who had entered the building during the power cut, a coordinated infiltration by a rival faction, using the blackout to test the compound's vulnerabilities. No one was seriously hurt. The building held. Jiho appeared in the doorway 4 minutes after the lights returned. He took in the room in one sweep, Min-soo in my arms, the backup monitor running, both of us intact. He stood there for a moment that was longer than it needed to be. His face was doing the thing I had learned to watch for, the small recalibration behind his eyes when something had reached him that he had not prepared to be reached by. "He's fine," I said. "Vitals are good." He was scared, not compromised. Jiho nodded. He came into the room and sat on the other side of Min-soo's bed. Min-soo moved his free hand to his father's arm. "Papa," he said, still in his serious reporting voice. "Amma came first." Jiho looked at me. "I know," he said quietly. "Then, I will tell you everything. Tonight. No more managed versions." He told me everything. We sat in his study for 3 hours after Min-soo was asleep, and Jiho spoke without editing for the first time since I had met him. He told me about the Shin faction, a rival organization led by a man named Shin Byung-ho, who had been waiting for a weakness in the Yun structure for years. Cha-Rin's illness was the vulnerability he had been waiting for. The power cut was a test, not a full assault. Byung-ho was methodical, and methodical men tested before they committed. He told me that my presence complicated things. Not because I was a weakness, but because I was an unknown. Byung-ho could not calculate me, and men like Byung-ho were threatened by variables they could not predict. Then he told me the rest. About the year after So-yun died, when he ran the organization and grieved and raised Min-soo and managed Cha-Rin's increasingly sharp maneuvering, all while telling himself that control was the same thing as coping. About the way the organization had required him to be unreachable, and how unreachable had slowly become the only way he knew how to be. About the specific loneliness of being surrounded by people who were loyal to you, but who you could not be honest with, because honesty and authority did not coexist in his world. He talked. I listened entirely, the full, uninterrupted kind of listening that I gave to patients explaining pain, the kind that says I am not going anywhere until you are finished. When he stopped, the room was very quiet. "You have been carrying all of this alone for 18 months, I said. "Yes." "That is not strength," I said carefully. "That is just isolation with better posture." He looked at me. Then something happened that I was not prepared for. He laughed. A short, surprised sound, like something that had been held under pressure and released before he could stop it. It was brief and unguarded and completely genuine, and it was, I realized, the first real laugh I had heard from him. "That is a very accurate description," he said. I looked at my hands. "I understand it. I have done versions of the same thing." "I know," he said. "I can see it in you. The same posture." We looked at each other in the study, in the quiet after everything had been said, and something between us settled into a different shape. 3 days later, Jiho told me about Byung-ho's request. Byung-ho wanted a meeting. Formal, neutral territory, luxury hotel. His stated message: he wanted to assess whether the Yun organization was stable before deciding his next move. His actual message: he wanted to look at me. The unknown variable. He was curious about a black female neurosurgeon sitting at the center of the Yun household, and curiosity from men like Byung-ho was a form of threat assessment. Jiho told me I did not have to attend. He made this clear with the specific phrasing of a man who was still learning not to manage people. I told him I would attend. Not for him, not for the organization, because Byung-ho had already made me a target and I would rather face that in a room than have it find me in a parking garage. I wore my hospital badge. I brought nothing else. The dinner was in a private room on the 52nd floor of a hotel in Gangnam. Byung-ho was in his early 60s, smooth, urbanely dressed, the kind of man whose danger lived entirely in his stillness. He spent the first part of the meal performing charm at me in a way that was also an examination, watching how I responded to flattery, to dismissal, to the careful deployment of condescension. Then he asked me a medical question about Minsu's condition. Specific, technical, designed to reveal whether I had been briefed with surface information or whether I actually knew. I answered it in 4 sentences that closed the question completely, and then asked him a follow-up that demonstrated I knew more about the underlying genetic mechanism than anyone in that room had anticipated. The shift in his attention was small, but I caught it. Jiho's hand moved on the table beside me, 2 fingers pressing down, briefly, and I had learned this was what he did when he was containing a reaction. At the end of the meal, Byung-ho leaned toward me. "You are too precise for this world," he said quietly. "Which means either you leave it or you choose it. I suggest you decide before someone else decides for you." I smiled at him pleasantly. "Thank you for dinner," I said. Cha-Rin was bedridden for 2 days the following week. Nobody said anything. Nobody knew how to speak about it. 40 years of watching this woman manage everything, and now she was in bed with her door half closed and her prayer beads untouched on the nightstand. The household did not know how to arrange itself around her absence. I managed her care quietly. I adjusted her medication schedule, sat with her through the harder mornings, monitored her vitals with the same attention I gave Minsu. I did this without announcing it and without leveraging it. One evening she called me in and said, with the stripped honesty of someone who had run out of time for any other kind, "I owe you an apology. I have not been able to construct properly. I brought you here without your full consent. I used your career as a tool. I put your name in a public narrative before you had agreed to it. I told myself it was love for my son and my grandson, and I believed that justified the method." She stopped. "I am no longer certain." I sat beside her bed in the chair that had become, in these past weeks, my chair. "It did not justify it," I said. "But I understand it. You were afraid and you were running out of time and you used the tools you had. I do not agree with what you did. But I can hold that next to the fact that I understand why you did it." She was quiet for a moment. "You are a more generous person than I deserve." "I am a doctor," I said. "We are trained to separate the person from the behavior." She almost smiled. "Then, there is a document. In my safe. Jiho does not know it exists. It concerns So-yeon. I need you to decide whether he should ever see it." She looked at me with her careful, exhausted eyes. "I am asking you," she said. "Not because I have the right to ask you anything. Because you are the only person in this building I trust to make the right decision." The document was a letter. So-yeon had written it 6 months before she died, addressed to Cha-Rin. It had been delivered through an intermediary. So-yeon had not trusted that leaving it anywhere in the household was safe. I read it twice, carefully, in the small room off Cha-Rin's suite. In the letter, So-yeon explained that she had found Cha-Rin's genetic analysis file. She had known about the vascular condition for months. She had chosen not to tell Jiho about her aneurysm, not only out of fear of Cha-Rin, but because she had been, for 2 years, quietly building a way out. She had been preparing to leave the marriage. Not dramatically, not vindicatively, but with the careful long-term planning of a woman who had concluded that the life she was living was not one she had ever truly chosen. The aneurysm had disrupted the timeline. The timeline had disrupted everything. And at the end of the letter, So-yeon had written, "Jiho is a man who deserves to be chosen freely. I never fully chose him. I was placed beside him and I stayed because leaving seemed harder. He does not know that is what happened, and I do not know how to tell him without destroying something. I am asking you, Cha-Rin, to find him someone who chooses him the way I never did. He has earned that." I set the letter down. The silence in the small room was enormous. I sat in it and thought about So-yeon, a woman I had never met, who had died carrying a truth too heavy to hold and too dangerous to share. I thought about what it costs a person to live inside someone else's architecture, pretending the walls are their own. Then I picked up the letter and went to find Jiho. I gave him the letter without explanation. I told him where it had come from, and I told him I had read it, and then I gave him space to read it himself. I waited in the corridor. It took 38 minutes. When the door opened, his face was the face of a man whose grief had just been replaced by a different grief. Not worse. Not better. Different in the specific way that changes the shape of everything you thought you were carrying. She was leaving, he said. Yes. She had been planning it for 2 years. Yes. He leaned against the door frame. Not for support exactly, but the way people lean when they need a moment to let something settle. I knew something was wrong. For years, I knew. I told myself I was imagining it. I convinced myself the distance between us was just the nature of our situation. He exhaled. I was not imagining it. No, I said. You weren't. He was quiet for a while. I waited. I was very good at waiting. She asked my mother to find me someone who would choose me freely, he said. He said it slowly, as if the words were being assembled from pieces that were still warm. Yes. He looked at me. Not the managed, controlled look he gave most things. The direct one. Does this change anything between you and me? I considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. It means the weight you were carrying wasn't the shape you thought it was. That changes things for you inside yourself. What happens between us is a separate question. He held my eyes. What is your answer to that question? And before I could speak, every alarm in the building went off simultaneously. The Shin faction had moved. Not with men this time. With information. Within the hour, 3 major Korean media outlets published a coordinated story, fabricated, sourced with manufactured correspondence and a fake financial trail, claiming that I had been brought to Seoul not as a legitimate researcher, but as a paid companion for Jiho. The story named me, showed my photograph, quoted invented communications. It was precisely designed to destroy my medical credibility in a single news cycle. My phone became a wall of noise. My mother called from Accra. My supervisor at Yonsei called. 3 colleagues from Johns Hopkins sent messages. Dr. Lim sent a single line. We always wondered how you plan to advance yourself here. I sat in the middle of it and went completely still. Not with defeat. With decision. I stood up. I need a press room, I said to Jiho's assistant, who was standing in the hallway looking uncertain. A lawyer. And someone who can reach the Korean Medical Association and the Yonsei Communications Office in the next 3 hours. Jiho appeared behind me. He heard the request. He said to his assistant, very quietly, give her everything she needs. Then he looked at me, and in his voice was something that had not been there before, not authority, not calculation. Just clear, unguarded, whatever you need. I stopped at the door. I looked back at him. To answer your question from before, I said, I am not going anywhere. Something happened in his face. Something opened. I turned and went to work. My press statement was 11 paragraphs. It was not emotional. It was evidenced, structured, and supported by documentation I had been quietly, methodically assembling since the first article ran. It included a formal statement from the Korean Medical Association. It included a letter from the chief of neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins, submitted within 90 minutes of my request. It included Minsu's anonymized surgical case summary, sufficient to make the complexity of the procedure undeniable and the manufactured narrative absurd. It also named Dr. Lim directly. His 8 months of professional harassment, documented through emails, through formal complaints he had filed with incorrect information, through a pattern of interference that I had been recording since my 3rd week at Yonsei. I had never used it before. I used it now, completely and without apology. The story inverted within a news cycle. Dr. Lim was placed under a formal university review within 24 hours. An investigative journalist who had been building a file on Byung-ho for years and had been waiting for exactly this kind of overreach to surface, published a thorough exposé on the fabricated correspondence. The Shin faction's credibility collapsed publicly. 3 of their key alliances withdrew within a week. Byung-ho issued a statement through his lawyers. Nobody believed it. I did not celebrate. I went and checked on Min-soo. He was sitting up in bed drawing whole pages of figures and buildings and what appeared to be medical equipment. He showed me his newest page without being asked. 3 figures. 1 tall and brown. 1 taller in a suit. 1 small, in the middle, holding both their hands. I gave us all the same smile, he said critically, studying his own work. Papa doesn't really smile like that yet, but I think he will. I looked at the drawing for a long moment. I think he will too, I said. 2 weeks later, Cha-Rin called a formal meeting of the Yun organization's senior staff. She entered the room with her full authority intact, wearing a pale gray suit with a silver brooch at the collar. She was thinner than she had been. Her hands were quieter on the table, but her voice was exactly what it had always been, precise, unhurried, and carrying the specific weight of a woman who had spent 40 years in this room and intended to say exactly what she meant for every minute of the time she had left. She made 3 announcements. First, she was formally transferring all organizational authority to Jiho, effective immediately and without condition. Second, she was establishing a medical research endowment named for So-Yun, dedicated to the study and treatment of inherited vascular malformation. She named me as its founding research director. The endowment had been funded at a level that meant I could hire a full team, run trials, and work at a scale that had never been accessible to me before. She had done this without telling me. I sat with the surprise of it, and then I sat with the understanding. This was her apology. Not words. Structure. Something that would last. Third, she looked at the assembled room and said, without sentiment and without drama, Dr. Mensah came to this household because I brought her here without her full consent. She stayed because she chose to. What happens between her and my son belongs entirely to them. I am finished arranging things. The room was very quiet. Jiho looked at his mother for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, privately. The kind of nod that carries everything that cannot be said in front of witnesses. After the meeting, Cha-Rin found me in the hallway. She took something from the pocket of her suit and placed it in my hand. I opened my palm. It was So-Yun's letter. Keep it, she said. You are the only person in this house who handled the truth without using it as a weapon. It belongs with someone like that. I held the letter carefully. How are you feeling? She considered the question. Lighter, she said, than I have felt in years. Min-soo's final clearance appointment was on a morning in February, 6 weeks post-surgery. His scans were clean and quiet, the kind of quiet that looked like a normal healthy brain on a screen, all the dangerous signals resolved. His development was on track. The vascular monitoring protocol I had designed for him would require check-ins every 4 months going forward for years, possibly for the rest of his childhood and into his adult life. I explained this to him directly, in language a 5-year-old could hold. Your brain is working exactly the way it should, I said. But I am going to need to visit and check on it sometimes. For a long time. Is that okay with you? He thought about this with absolute seriousness. Yes, he said. but you have to stay for dinner when you come. That is a reasonable condition, I said. He grinned a full, unguarded, brilliant grin that his father had not yet managed to replicate at full volume. I laughed, properly and completely, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere unguarded. Ji-ho was in the doorway. He watched me laugh in his son's room with the look of a man who had made a private decision and was at peace with it. Afterward, he walked with me to the small courtyard. February air, pale sun, the bare branches of a cherry tree that Min-soo had told me was spectacular in spring. I had caught myself, more than once, thinking I would like to see that. Ji-ho stood beside me. No performance. No distance. Just a man who had run out of armor and was not trying to find more. I would like to know what it looks like, he said, to do this properly. You and me. No contract, no arrangement, no timeline. Just if you are willing. I thought about Accra and Johns Hopkins and a fellowship that had nearly broken me. I thought about a surgery that lasted 7 hours and 40 minutes and a 5-year-old who drew me into his pictures before I had decided to stay. I thought about So-yeon, who had never gotten to choose, and about Cha-Rin, who had spent 40 years choosing for everyone and was only now learning to stop. I was going to choose. I'm willing, I said. Somewhere behind the window above us, Cha-Rin was in her chair in the pale light. She had stopped watching. She was simply sitting, her prayer beads still, her tea warm, Min-soo's laughter floating up from the courtyard like something she had waited a long time to hear. She let it be enough. Some stories end with noise and fire. This one ended with a courtyard in winter, a tree waiting for spring, and 2 people choosing freely, finally, fully, entirely on their own terms to begin. I have thought many times about the night I climbed into that black SUV with zip ties on my wrists and a dying child waiting somewhere in a building with no name. I have thought about what I knew then versus what I know now. Then I knew a child needed me. I knew the woman who came to my parking garage was powerful and accustomed to getting what she wanted. I knew that I had one rule that had never failed me. When a patient needs you, you go. Everything else is a problem you solve on the way. What I did not know was that I was walking into a story already in progress. That Cha-Rin had been building toward that moment for 3 years. That the thread connecting me to this family was older than I had any way of understanding. That the little boy on the operating table and the quiet man watching from behind the glass and the dying woman arranging orchids in a sitting room were all parts of a picture that had been waiting, patiently, for me to arrive and see it whole. I did not know that Cha-Rin had spent 2 years looking for the woman who had stayed in a backstreet clinic on a terrifying night when nobody else would. I did not know that she had traced that woman, verified her, waited for the right moment, and then manufactured a crisis to bring her in, because Cha-Rin did not ask for things. She built situations in which the outcome she wanted became the only logical conclusion. I was furious about that for a long time. I am still partly furious about it. Some things deserve to stay a little sharp. But I also know this. Cha-Rin did not invent what was between Ji-ho and me. She could not have invented it. What she did was notice a thread and refuse to let it go unnoticed. She was wrong about the method. She was not wrong about what she found. Ji-ho and I did not become easy with each other after that morning in the courtyard. Ease was never going to be our natural register. We were both people who had learned to hold ourselves carefully, who had built entire architectures of self-sufficiency around the specific fear of needing something we might not get. That does not dissolve because someone says I'm willing in a winter courtyard. It dissolves slowly, in the small repeated choices to be honest instead of guarded, to show the seams instead of hiding them, to let another person carry some of the weight without calculating whether they'll drop it. We were learning that. We are still learning it. Some lessons do not arrive fully formed. They arrive in installments. Minsu turned 6 in March. His party was small by the standards of his world, 15 children, a cake shaped like a brain at his specific request, which told you everything you needed to know about how much time he had spent listening to his doctor explain neuroscience in language a 5-year-old could hold. He wore a tiny suit that made him look exactly like his father, and he took the responsibility of hosting with the same total seriousness he brought to everything. At the end of the party, when the other children had gone and Minsu was half asleep against Jiho's shoulder, he looked up at me with his heavy eyes and said, "Amma, are you staying?" I looked at Jiho. He was watching me with the expression he reserved for things he wanted very much and had decided to want honestly, without armor or calculation. "Yes," I said. "I'm staying." Minsu nodded once, as if this confirmed information he had already filed away as certain. "Good," he said. "I told Halmiani you would." He was asleep within seconds. Jiho looked at me over his son's head with a quiet, unguarded expression that I had no interest in translating into words. Some things are more accurate left as feeling. Cha-Rin had 8 months from her diagnosis. She used them well. She stepped back from organizational control with the same deliberate care she had used to build it. She began sleeping more and arguing less. She spent mornings in the garden with Minsu and afternoons in her chair by the window, and she told me once that the window was the best seat she had found in 40 years because you could see everything from it and nothing required you to manage it. She passed on a Tuesday in autumn, with the city doing exactly what it always did outside her window and Minsu's drawings covering the wall beside her bed. She had requested them specifically, a gallery of his small, precise figures, taped up by his own careful hands. The last one he made for her was the 3 of us in the courtyard. The cherry tree in full bloom. Both figures adult-sized, holding hands. Minsu standing in front of them, arms spread wide like someone who had just won something. She had called it her favorite. I carried Soyeon's letter in the inside pocket of my coat for months. Eventually, I understood what I was supposed to do with it. I placed it in the Foundation's archive, the Soyeon Foundation, which by the end of its first year had funded 3 research positions, 1 clinical trial, and a genetic screening program that had already identified 47 families carrying the vascular malformation before it could become a crisis. I placed the letter there because Soyeon had asked for something and had not lived to see it happen. She deserved a record. She deserved to know, somewhere, that what she asked for was done. Jiho came with me to the archive that day. We stood in front of the display case where the letter had been placed framed, behind glass, its words preserved but private, visible only as handwriting rather than text. He stood there for a while. Then he said, she knew what she was asking for was real. She just couldn't figure out how to get out of the way of it herself. Neither could you, I said. He considered that. No, he said. I needed help. He looked at me. Thank you for not running. Thank you for eventually telling me the truth, I said. He almost smiled. Then he did smile. The full one, the one that changed his face and that I still, after everything, had not entirely prepared myself for. We walked out of the archive into the afternoon light, and the city moved around us the way it always did, indifferent, enormous, beautiful in the specific way of places that do not care about your story, but give you room to live it anyway. This is not the story I would have written for myself at 32, standing in a hospital parking garage in Seoul with a stranger's 8 words rearranging everything. But then, the best stories rarely are. They are the ones that arrive sideways, in black SUVs, through contracts we refuse to sign and battles we win on our own terms and small boys who draw us into their pictures before we have decided to stay. I stayed. Freely. Entirely on my own terms. That is the only part that mattered. If this story reached something in you, share it right now with someone who needs to hear it. And before you go, drop your location in the comments. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. I read every single one. If you are not subscribed yet, hit that button because the next story we tell here will stay with you just as long as this one did. You found this channel for a reason. Don't leave without subscribing. See you in the next one.